The Modern Context podcast is fully in the double digits, so to celebrate, we're kicking off the new year with a look back at some of the stories we covered in 2023. Hello, and welcome to the Modern Context podcast. I'm your host, Yasmin Aliyah Khan, and I'm very happy you're here. If you're back, thank you for coming back, and if it's your first time, I'm very glad to have you. And if it is your first time here, this is a particularly good episode for you to hop in on. First things first, Happy New Year to everyone. 2024 is here. It kicked off with a bang too. Did you all hear about that earthquake in Japan? I don't mean to be flippant about it. As of me recording this, the death toll has reached 55 people and recovery efforts are under the gun, more than they would otherwise be because there are also tsunami warnings along the Japanese coast. Natural disasters tend to strike different chords with people watching from afar because, yes, you can discuss the ways in which governments prepared for and responded to the disaster, but for the most part, it's just a humanitarian effort. There's no one to directly blame. You can just do your best to support recovery efforts however best you can. For once, even though politics are still certainly present in situations like this one, they tend to take more of a backseat. Unless, of course, you're talking about Trump throwing paper towels at Puerto Ricans or redirecting hurricanes with a Sharpie. Oh my God, the Trump years were so weird. So I know people love to look ahead into the new year, setting resolutions and such, but I thought it would be fun to take a look back at some of the stories that we covered last year and get some updates on them. I happened to end the year with my 10th episode, which wasn't planned, but I really liked the way that worked out. 10 episodes may seem like a silly milestone for some people, but the fact of the matter is that for me, it is a huge one. I put a lot of time and effort and myself into these episodes, so getting to 10 was a pretty big deal. What a ride. But regarding the stories, I think it's important to check back in on things periodically because just because we stop talking about something doesn't mean it still isn't very real for the people living through it. And I get it. It's exhausting to keep talking about things that hurt our hearts or our souls or just our brains. And it can be tricky to find the balance between living your own life while holding peace for those who can't live as they would like to. I get a lot of flack for being a somewhat public figure who is not very active on social media. So apparently I don't speak out about things as much as I could or should. But the truth is, when I'm not doing this work here or on TYT or wherever, I still have to live my own life off of my phone, out of my office. We all do what we can with the best of intentions, and every little bit helps. That said, it can be very disconcerting and frustrating seeing the ills of the world and feeling utterly helpless against them. Of course, there are things we can do. We can donate to causes that we believe in, and we can just hope that our money gets to where it needs to be. We can write or call our congresspeople and representatives. We can protest, we can boycott, and hopefully drive social and political change through economic change. We can raise awareness on social media. We can do all of these things and more, and still it can feel like no one is listening. It can feel like our efforts are meaningless unless they happen on the absolute grandest of scales. Personally, I know my representatives literally don't care about the will of their constituents. They'll just continue to do whatever they want to do until maybe one day they're finally voted out of office. Right now, and maybe this is myopic of me, my biggest source of hope is that Texas one day turns purple because I feel like if that happens in Texas, it'll be an indicator of greater change around the country. Like if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere. And not to be all America first, but it's undeniable the influence this country has on the rest of the world and within the UN. Going forward, it would be very nice to see this country use that influence more positively in a way that is more representative of the values it claims to stand for. Or maybe we just need to reevaluate or update our American values altogether. I don't know. Anyway, let's dive in. Let's start with episode 1 of the Modern Context podcast, talking about Guyana, South America. To kick off the first episode of a podcast where I knew that I would be talking about people and places that were close to people's hearts, I had to start with a place that was close to mine. It just so happened that that place for me is, for the first time in my life, super topical at the moment. An incredible amount of oil was discovered in Guyana, a small country in South America, that until recently, not many people had heard of. Seriously, I can think of only a handful of times in my entire life when I would mention Guyana to people and they actually knew what I was talking about. In that episode, we talked about the ways in which such a large oil discovery would inevitably transform life in such a small and, relatively speaking, insignificant country. But I also mentioned that the oil discovery triggered the flare-up of an old land dispute that went back to the colonial days. Venezuela has a territorial claim on the Essequibo region of Guyana, which happens to be where the oil was discovered. Now Venezuela is claiming that that oil is theirs. In the time since I recorded that episode, Venezuela has made threatening moves against Guyana, moving troops to the border between the two nations. In response, the UK moved a warship to the coast in support of Guyana, its former colony. Venezuela is getting rather bold here, but while there may be some military activity along the border, it seems unlikely that either the US or the UK will allow anything to happen in Guyana. Guyana doesn't have much of a military, probably because it never really needed to have much of one. But the US and the UK won't let Venezuela's dictator interfere with their oil claims and infrastructure. They've worked too hard to build a cooperative relationship with the Guyanese government, and too many American and British corporations have moneyed interests in the country. Venezuela may make some noise, but personally, I'm not particularly worried about them. I am worried about other things, like the likely possibility that foreign nations will exploit a small country's resources and people and destroy its natural diversity in the name of capitalism, but not Venezuela. Moving on, episode 2, we were talking about debates, which led to a conversation around words and conversations and the ways that they can and do impact culture and influence society. We also got into propaganda and how the modern-day public relations industry was born from using political propaganda techniques to sell people things and ideas they didn't necessarily need or want. It feels weird saying that the 2024 presidential election is ramping up when it's still almost a year away, but we've definitely been seeing more activity on the debate front lately. I mentioned in episode 2 that I don't watch debates and I've stuck to that. I do read the headlines though that come from them, and maybe I'll watch a clip or two, but generally I don't watch them. However, I will say that there have been a few juicy moments from that one random debate between Ron DeSantis and Gavin Newsom. I'm still not sure why DeSantis agreed to that debate. Newsom, who isn't even running for president, didn't have much to lose by doing the debate, and he certainly didn't hold back against DeSantis. Besides, when it comes to charisma, Newsom's objectively got a ton of it, and DeSantis objectively has none. DeSantis didn't look great standing next to Newsom on that stage. And maybe it feels wrong to discuss things like charisma at a time in our nation's history when there are a million better things to be talking about. But the fact of the matter is that looks, charisma, charm, and speaking ability more often contribute to the ways in which people vote for political leadership than things like merit or competency. I feel like Glinda the Good Witch right now from Wicked, where she's talking about popular. The dream of a democratic meritocracy is unfortunately just a dream. It seems as though those who are most capable of leadership either don't want to be in that position or they can't sell themselves to the public well enough. Democracy is great, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times it becomes a bit of a popularity contest. And that's why, at least in this modern era, I think debates are pointless. When our nation's politics are so incredibly polarized, people already know who they're going to vote for. No one's getting swayed from one side to the other at this point. But if you are planning to watch the upcoming debates this year, good luck to you. Episode 3, Existentialism, specifically existentialism as it pertains to climate change and climate dread. I had seen Barbenheimer, the Barbie movie, and the Oppenheimer movie right before I started working on the episode, and in both of those movies, I was surprised to see that death and our relationship with death was a major theme. Well, I guess I wasn't as surprised that it was a theme in Oppenheimer, but I wasn't expecting it as much in Barbie. For Barbie, she was grappling with stagnancy and complacency, and what it meant to represent an ideal that maybe wasn't as timeless as you thought it was. Barbie begins to contemplate her own death, which makes sense because things need beginnings and endings. Without endings, there is no growth. There is no goal. There is only existence for the sake of existence, and existence generally should be about something a little more. In Oppenheimer, a physicist was grappling with his own demons. On one hand, there was his scientific creation, his contribution to the scientific community and to his country. But on the other hand, there were the impacts that his creation would have on the world and on himself. The world changed because of what he created. Millions of people suffered because of him, and the only moral justification that has ever been offered is that millions more people would have, hypothetically, probably, maybe, suffered had he not built his bomb. One man, a team of scientists, and the US government built a bomb, and millions of innocent people suffered for it. Similarly, a handful of corporations, governments, and otherwise influential people create inordinate amounts of climate-related dissonance on our planet, and the rest of us suffer their consequences. Our water is contaminated, our air is hazy and laced with carcinogens, probably, maybe. Our lands are paved and our trees are cut. Our public transit systems are non-existent because as good Americans, we're supposed to drive absolutely everywhere to support the fossil fuel industry. Anything less would make you a communist. But you don't have to be a communist to want to drink clean water that doesn't have forever chemicals in it. In episode 5, we talked about what would happen with the Speaker of the House, and wow, a lot has happened there. At the time that episode was released, Republican Kevin McCarthy had been ousted from the speakership by the same people who put him there, and McCarthy's successor was anyone's guess. For a minute, it looked like it was going to come down to Jim Jordan versus Steve Scalise, but literally right after the episode dropped, Scalise withdrew from contention. Then Jordan couldn't get the vote, so Mike Johnson ended up as Speaker of the House. This guy is so boring and nondescript and forgettable that every time I talk about him, I have to do a quick Google search to make sure I'm getting his name right. Johnson's only been Speaker for just over 2 months, but what a strange 2 months it has been. To say Mike Johnson was a fairly unknown congressperson prior to his speakership is an understatement. He's an evangelical Christian from Louisiana who is incredibly homophobic and anti-abortion. He has an adopted adult black son who he loves to talk about, and he's got super sketchy finances that have come under scrutiny since he took a more public leadership role. And apparently he thinks he's basically Moses. While speaking to a crowd, when he thought the cameras were off, Johnson said that his speakership was his, quote, Red Sea moment, of course alluding to the story from Exodus when Moses parted the Red Sea so that the Israelites could escape persecution. He said, quote, the Lord told me very clearly to prepare. Then he described a back and forth conversation that he allegedly had with the Lord. Quote, you ready? Ready for what? We're coming to a Red Sea moment. What does that mean? He thought it meant that the Lord was going to appoint a new Moses and that he was supposed to help that new Moses ascend. But then he realized, no, the new Moses is me. Look, there's a reason why he wanted those cameras off before he said any of that. One of the issues I have with religion, and despite what some of you may think, I don't actually think it's all bad, but I don't think it has much of a place in government, and I think it can certainly contribute to delusions of grandeur and self-importance and narcissism, which is exactly what we're seeing here with Mike Johnson. He was stuck in the role as a patsy for the far right, but in his mind, it's because he's the new Moses, put in position to do whatever he thinks is God's will. No, dude, you're just a pawn, and you're probably not going to last very long as speaker. Episode 6 was all about Guatemala. At the time, progressive leader Bernardo Arévalo had been democratically elected president, but the corrupt forces within the government were determined to ensure that he would never take office. About a month ago, the Guatemalan Congress stripped the electoral judges of immunity. The judges are being accused of committing election fraud, and presumably this is being done so that those judges can be removed from position and replaced with judges who are more sympathetic to the causes of the elite ruling class. Ironically, or I guess predictably, Arévalo ran for office on an anti-corruption platform, and now that same corruption is trying to keep him from being inaugurated. A couple of weeks ago, after this happened, Guatemala's top court ordered Congress to guarantee that Arévalo would be inaugurated. Opposing forces had supposedly concluded that Arévalo's election was null and void due to anomalies in the election process, but the Supreme Electoral Tribunal said, quote, the results are validated, formalized, and unchangeable. Arevalo is supposed to take office on January 14th, so Inauguration Day is fast approaching. After drawing international eyes and condemnation, the Guatemalan ruling class seems to understand that blocking Arevalo's inauguration won't be feasible, but there are other ways to weaken a leader and weaken a government. And I say this every time things like this come up. What's sad is that people are now so preoccupied fighting battles that don't need to be fought that they're unable to work on things that need to be worked on. Obstructionism is costly in more ways than one, and all of this is happening during the crucial period between the election and the inauguration, when a president-elect is supposed to be preparing for the transition of power. I'm fairly confident that Arevalo will be inaugurated, but I don't expect any part of his presidency to be easy for him. Episode 7 was our Thanksgiving episode, and we discussed what it was like to celebrate a holiday that has a history rooted in lies, a heavily laundered version of history. Can there still be gratitude on that day? Does the fable and the folklore behind it prevent the sentiment of the day from being true and valuable? Perhaps those meanings and values change over time, transforming with the times as they should. Still, that kind of growth can only happen when it's acknowledged by the celebrating public, when the meaning of the holiday truly transforms from one thing to another. Unfortunately, people still talk about the first Thanksgiving as though it was a giant party between the indigenous population and their new white friends, a party that symbolized a friendship that would last centuries. But we know that that's not true. The information is out there, so why hasn't the narrative changed? Folklore is passed down culturally from generation to generation. It takes time to update school curriculums, to change people's minds about the things that happened and why they happened. It also takes effort on the collective community's part to listen to, learn, and absorb new information as it becomes available. I don't think most people celebrating Thanksgiving in this country are actively celebrating the genocide of the indigenous people of this land. In fact, I don't know a single person who is quote-unquote celebrating that genocide. That said, a lot of people in comment sections would disagree with me there. They think eating turkey on Thanksgiving is celebrating genocide, or at least being indifferent to it. What I'm more concerned about is the fact that the remaining indigenous population of this country is still overlooked, still neglected, and still disrespected. They're treated abhorrently by our nation's government, and most Americans seem to forget that they're still here. They don't have much representation in our national government, something that has thankfully changed, but only very, very recently. But for something to change in meaning, that change has to be widely understood and accepted more than the previous meaning. We're not there yet, but perhaps we can get there soon. In episode 8, we talked about Black Friday and malls, but the episode was actually more about the dying of the American middle class, the ways in which consumerism is embedded in our culture, and the ways in which we've structured society right down to our freeway systems and neighborhoods around consumption. In the episode, I mentioned that the holiday shopping season has now stretched from the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas to the entire month of October. I was getting Black Friday deals and ads on my phone since before Halloween, and now I can tell you that I didn't stop getting Black Friday deals until after Christmas. What? Online shops are trying to get rid of surplus, I guess, so they're pushing out these closeout deals into the new year, and I'm exhausted. Granted, I'm always doing projects around the house, so I picked up some good deals on curtains and things like that, so I don't want to complain too hard, but those are things that I would have bought anyway. I didn't buy them because I just couldn't resist a Black Friday deal. Or maybe I did. Maybe I just tell myself that I make decisions independently when really I'm being influenced and marketed to all the time just like everyone else. When I finally make a purchase, is it because I was looking for something so hard? Or was it because I was being fed options? And if the latter, is that so bad? Yes, it does feel incredibly invasive when the internet knows exactly what you want before you do, but isn't that the way marketing is supposed to work? I have an MBA and I worked in marketing for a bit. And in the time between when I went to grad school and when I started working in marketing, so much in the industry had changed. My degree was practically obsolete by the time I graduated. It was at the time when digital marketing was really starting to take off, supplanting more traditional forms of marketing as the new gold standard. And the main reason for this was efficiency. With a billboard, companies pay tons of money to just blast an area with its ad. The return on investment is incredibly difficult to track, and that it's hard to determine who bought a product or service specifically because they saw that billboard. And it's incredibly difficult to target a specific market with a billboard. The end result is gaudy roadsides and regular people just taking in ads that aren't relevant to them. Conversely, digital marketing was itself marketed as the answer to those problems. Algorithms, metrics, cookies, and more would help to narrow and focus an ad's audience, saving the advertiser money and feeding consumers ads that are the most relevant to them. And for most of us, we're on the consumer end of things. And as much as people love to talk about late-stage capitalism, I wouldn't necessarily assume that late stage in this case suggests any kind of impending societal disruption or collapse. I think we'll stretch this late stage out for quite a while because as it stands now, there's not much of anything to replace it with. Well, this one's easy. Episode 9 was about Henry Kissinger, and the update here is that he is still dead. This episode explored the idea of legacy by examining some of Kissinger's most notable works, we'll call them. But the sad truth is that while Kissinger may be dead, his legacy has thus far proven to be far-reaching and long-lasting. And that's something that you see all the time when you explore history too. So many times when you're researching a particular ongoing conflict in the world today, something that impacts millions and millions of people, something that shapes generations of people, industries, and cultures, sometimes they were put in motion by a single decision made by a single person. When you think about yourself as a human being, there's a weight that we all have. We carry it with us everywhere we go. It builds and builds as we go through our lives, and when we die, that weight is supposedly, released into the universe or wherever it goes. It's comprised of things like money, wealth, power, and influence. For instance, the more money we hold in our names, the more responsibility we have to ourselves and to others. The more influential we are, the more significant each and every one of our actions and decisions can be, and the more impactful they can be. It's also comprised of our experiences, though, the things that shape us into who we are today. I always joke with my friends that if I was just a few inches taller, I would be a completely different person. I would exist in an entirely different world. Something so seemingly insignificant, I'm absolutely sure would have changed maybe everything about me, because each one of my lived experiences would have been different. Everything I would have known would have been tinted differently. I literally, physically, would have had a different perspective on life, and people probably would have treated me differently at, say, 5'4" than they do at 5'0". This world is fickle and changeable and unpredictable. I'm not sure that people like Henry Kissinger can be avoided in the future, and I can only assume that some yet unknown version of him is currently operating around the world somewhere. And yes, I'm only 5 feet tall. I have no inches. And we've made it all the way to episode 10. This one was different, struck a few chords. We talked about belief and belief systems. Since it was my most recent episode, I won't get too much into it again, but as we head into the new year, always with fresh eyes and very, very cautious optimism because we've all been burned before, I hope that we can just continue to challenge ourselves and our own beliefs. I hope that our personal beliefs won't be used as weapons or as justification to hurt other people, and I hope that as we watch conflict play out at home and abroad, that we consider our role within it. Even if that just means that we examine our own feelings about the things we know and seek out clarity about the things we don't. We're all existing in this world together. It doesn't need to be as difficult as we often make it, but true, lasting, penetrating change grows from the ground up. It rarely comes from the top down. All right, that is it for episode 11 of the Modern Context podcast. That was fun, took a little bit longer than I thought it would, but as I said, it's always a good idea to keep up with things, especially as you continue to move forward in the world. Good luck with your New Year's resolutions, good luck in January and in 2024, and good luck existing in such a way that you're not making things more difficult for others. Anyway, until next time, we would love to hear from you. Reach out to the show at hello@modconpod.com with any suggestions or questions you might have for us. Also, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on YouTube and tell your friends about us. And of course, thank you all for listening. Happy New Year, and I can't wait to see y'all next time. Thanks. Modern Context is a rabble-babble production, produced by Brandon Morgan and recorded live in Houston, Texas. For Modern Context, I'm your writer and host, Yasmin Aaliyah Khan.